Ali Khamenei, the Silent Strategist of Iran. Read and published by Mr. Books. In the ancient fountains of civilization, where kingdoms rose and fell amid the sands of Persia, leadership has always come draped in layers of intrigue. Modern Iran, a puzzle for outsiders, finds much of its resolve and reticence in one figure, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Unlike flamboyant statesmen, whose voices echo through the chambers of history, Khamenei is a silent strategist, orchestrating immense shifts in the Middle East from behind a veil of discretion. Ali Khamenei's life is a study in contrasts, a soft-spoken cleric whose influence extends across continents, a revolutionary who became the guardian of the very establishment he once challenged, a poet and a scholar whose hands wield the reins of military, economy, and diplomacy. Since ascending to the highest seat of power in 1989, after Ayatollah Khomeini's death, Khamenei has skillfully guided Iran through domestic upheaval, international sanctions, and shifting global alliances. Yet he remains shrouded in mystery too. Most observers understanding Khamenei demands a foray beyond typical biographies. It requires an exploration of not only the milestones of his life, but the philosophy, caution, and tactical patience that underpin his rule. Western observers often misread Iran as the handiwork of a bombastic president or a gathering of firebrand parliamentarians, missing the subtle design and deliberateness with which Khamenei operates. His doctrine thrives in ambiguity, and his methods are often indirect empowering proxies, nurturing parallel institutions, and mediating between factions. The supreme leader's authority is not just a matter of constitutional power, but a delicate consensus of religious legitimacy, revolutionary mythos, and calculated coercion. Under his stewardship, Iran has projected influence from Baghdad to Beirut, weathered economic siege, and stifled internal dissent, all while rarely becoming the face of any confrontation. This elusive leadership style has polarized analysts, hailed by supporters as wise and prudent, regarded by opponents as manipulative and repressive. This book seeks to untangle the enigma of Khamenei. Each section delves into a different dimension of his leadership: his early education and radicalization, the pivotal years after the revolution, the consolidation of authority, and the mechanisms both overt and hidden that allow him to steer one of the world's most complex societies. The narrative crosses battlefields, cabinet rooms, and shrines, always in search of the invisible hand shaping Iran's fate. As Iran continues to defy and engage with the world in equal measure, Khamenei's legacy, crafted in shadows, grows ever more relevant. Through meticulous research and candid analysis, this book reveals the man, the mind, and the method behind modern Iran's silent strategist. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. Origins of a Leader, Early Life and Formation. The story of Ali Hosseini Khamenei begins in the heart of Mashhad, the sacred city, the pulse of northeastern Iran. It was July 1939. Iran stood on the cusp of immense turmoil. Foreign armies would soon tread its soil, and beneath the surface, old certainties were fragmenting. Yet, to the family of a modest cleric, these vast forces felt distant as they welcomed their second son into a climate marked by religious devotion and intellectual austerity. From his earliest days, Khamenei was immersed in an environment that prized learning above all else. The Khamenei household was neither wealthy nor powerful, but it was steeped in the traditions of Shia clericalism. His father, Sayyid Javad Khamenei, was a respected religious scholar, noted for his piety and simplicity. Days in the family home revolved around the rhythms of prayer, study, and debate, a microcosm of the seminaries that dominated Mashhad's culture. As a precocious child, Ali absorbed these influences deeply. He devoured texts on theology, Persian poetry, and classical Arabic, often memorizing verses that would later anchor his speeches. His intellectual gifts soon outpaced his peers, and he was inducted into the rigorous discipline of the Hazeh Islamic Seminary. This was not just a scholastic venture. For a young Khamenei, it was an introduction to the world of ideas, dissent, and philosophy that swirled beneath Iran's surface. By the late 1950s, Khamenei's formative years intersected with Iran's national trauma. The shadow cast by the 1953 coup, which ousted Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and restored Mohammad Reza Shah to unbridled power, shaped his worldview. Political repression was omnipresent. Universities and mosques were both havens and hotbeds of opposition, fueling the fires of what would eventually become a revolution. Khamenei was drawn to the teachings and activism of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, whose opposition to the Shah's autocratic modernism resonated deeply in clerical circles. Khamenei would later recount how Khomeini's blend of activism and piety became the gold standard for the generation of seminarians searching for relevance and purpose. The budding scholar began attending underground meetings, delivering impassioned sermons, and distributing clandestine literature, all high-risk acts in the Shah's Iran. But his early activism was as much intellectual as it was political. Khamenei's lectures and translations introduced a new current. Islamic governance was not merely moral or metaphysical, but a viable blueprint for an ethical society. He translated the works of Islamist theorists, discussed the revolutionary, anti-colonial movements sweeping the Arab world, and outlined how Islamic law could underpin national sovereignty. This distinct synthesis of faith, activism, and political modernity would become the cornerstone of his philosophy. Frequent arrests, surveillance, and brief stints in prison became a fact of life. Each incarceration steeled his resolve. Unlike some compatriots who chose exile, Khamenei remained in Iran, deepening his ties to social networks in Mashhad, Tehran, and Qom. The experience of pain and endurance, the forging of identity amidst adversity, became his silent badge. Contemporary accounts describe a man of intense discipline, seldom seeking attention, but always radiating a quiet authority, traits that would later define his leadership style. By the late 1970s, as the storm of revolution gathered, Khamenei was no longer merely a student or activist. He was an integral part of the underground network, keeping the opposition alive. Yet, unlike more charismatic figures, he preferred the background organizing, counseling, mediating. It was not yet apparent that he would one day rule, but his talents for strategy and consensus were already unmistakable. Khamenei's early life set the stage, not only for his own future, but for Iran's as well. In him, the discipline of the seminarian, the resilience of the revolutionary, and the subtlety of the strategist combined in ways neither allies nor adversaries could easily anticipate. These formative years, rooted in an unremarkable household in Mashhad, quietly shaped the destiny of a nation. Chapter 2. From Revolution to Republic. Khamenei's rise. The Iran of the 1970s trembled on the brink of dramatic transformation. Decades of autocratic rule, Western interference, and widening social divides had left deep scars. Economic modernization, while impressive on the surface, had failed to deliver justice or alleviate hardship for the vast majority, a fertile ground for revolutionaries of every shade. It was in this crucible that Ali Khamenei evolved from an underground activist to a public revolutionary leader. Khamenei's activism in the final years of the Shah's rule was profoundly shaped by his relationship with Ayatollah Khomeini. As the revolution gained momentum, he became a linchpin in the organizational effort, bridging disparate opposition groups through the power of clandestine communication and improvisational leadership. Wherever the undercurrents of discontent were strongest in the seminaries, the bazaar, or the slums, Khamenei's presence was felt. He refused to be a mere figurehead. Instead, he acted as an organizer and tactician, engineering networks that could survive state repression. When the revolution erupted into mass street protests in 1978, Khamenei's resistance shifted from mosques and homes to the very heart of Tehran's political life. His spinal resolve was tested repeatedly as he coordinated demonstrations, challenged police cordons, and negotiated between rival factions of the burgeoning opposition. Drawing on his seminary training, he framed the revolution as a just war, spiritually necessary and politically legitimate. In the fevered days leading up to February 1979, there was little doubt that Khamenei had become an indispensable lieutenant to Khomeini. Their alliance was founded not just on ideology, but pragmatic trust. Khamenei was among the few whom Khomeini would later entrust with classified intelligence and high-level missions. As the Shah fled and the monarchy crumbled, Khamenei found himself at the epicenter of Iran's future, a future brimming with both opportunity and peril. Establishing the Islamic Republic, however, was no mere matter of hoisting new banners over old institutions. Revolutionary fervor had to be transformed into administrative reality. It was here that Khamenei's organizational skills and adaptability proved crucial. He quickly accepted positions of responsibility. He joined the Revolutionary Council, ran intelligence assessment units, and became the Friday prayer leader. In Tehran, a post steeped with both spiritual and political significance, Khamenei's steady ascent was neither accidental nor without contest. The early republic was riven with ideological and factional strife. Radical leftists, secular nationalists, moderate clerics, and hardline Islamists all vied for dominance in the new order. Khamenei maneuvered with care, avoiding the temptations of extremism and isolation. Instead, he acted as a broker, reminding each faction of the necessity of unity in the face of external threats and internal sabotage. Through the tumultuous hostage crisis with the United States, the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War, and the purges of political rivals, Khamenei consistently aligned himself with those advocating for Islamic governance, revolutionary vigilance, and national sovereignty. His public addresses, often less fiery than those of his contemporaries, nevertheless communicated a deep resolve. He argued for collective leadership, eschewed the trappings of personality cults, and used every setback to reinforce the legitimacy of the new order. The war with Iraq, 1980 to 1988, became Khamenei's crucible. As thousands perished on the front lines, he frequently visited embattled troops, delivered morale-boosting sermons, and coordinated support for the war effort. These were not acts of mere symbolism. Khamenei took personal risks, survived multiple assassination attempts, and forged unbreakable bonds with the Revolutionary Guards and Basij militia, units relationships that would anchor his future rule. In 1981, the trajectory of Khamenei's life changed dramatically following a failed assassination attempt that left him with a permanently paralyzed right arm. Far from weakening his influence, this brush with death cemented Khamenei's standing as a martyr for the cause, someone who had paid in blood for the revolution's survival. It also intensified his reliance on discretion and indirect communication, further developing the style that would become his hallmark. His executive acumen was soon rewarded. In 1981, he was appointed President of the Republic, an extraordinary achievement for a cleric in a system where the president was initially meant to balance clerical authority with the demands of statecraft. Khamenei's presidency, 1981 to 1989, would be marked by the end of the war, the beginnings of post-war reconstruction, and the ever-present challenge of maintaining revolutionary fervor in the face of fatigue and division. Throughout this period, Khamenei remained the silent strategist, a leader more comfortable forging consensus behind closed doors than delivering populist oratory. He cultivated alliances within the burgeoning security apparatus, especially the IRGC, while maintaining a close partnership with Iran's technocrats. His approach was incremental and pragmatic, rooted in the hard lessons of both seminary debates and revolutionary struggle. By the decade's end, as Khomeiни's health waned, Khamenei stood on the precipice of history. Neither the most charismatic cleric nor the supreme jurist in the country, he was nonetheless the indispensable man, the bridge between revolution and republic, faith and pragmatism. In positioning himself as an architect rather than a mere executor of power, Khamenei prepared for the monumental transition to come the rise to the supreme leadership. Chapter 3. Heir apparent navigating power after Khamenei, the death of Ayatollah. Ruhollah Khomeini in June 1989 cast a shadow across Iran a few dared imagine. Khomeini was not merely the founder of the Islamic Republic. He was the living embodiment of its revolutionary fervor and spiritual legitimacy. To fill his shoes was to inherit not just an office, but an entire cosmos of expectations, rivalries, and existential threats. It was in this tense, uncertain moment that Ali Khamenei emerged as the unlikely heir. Khamenei's elevation was neither preordained nor uncontested. In the immediate aftermath of Khomeini's death, political elites convened with unprecedented urgency. The assembly of experts faced a stark dilemma: upholding Khomeini's vision of Vilayat-e-Faqih guardianship of the jurist required a figure with unimpeachable religious credentials, revolutionary legitimacy, and political prudence. Though Khamenei met the latter two criteria, he was not the most senior cleric in the country. His religious rank, at that point, was insufficient by traditional standards. The debate within the assembly was fierce, bordering on chaotic. Senior theorists argued for continuity, while others pressed for a collective leadership model. But Khamenei's lifelong reputation as a consensus builder, combined with the advocacy of key figures such as Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, tipped the balance. On June 4, 1989, following a tense session, Khamenei was named supreme leader, a decision that sent ripples through the political, religious, and security echelons of Iran. Assuming this role necessitated immediate action on several fronts. Khamenei moved quickly to bolster his religious credentials, undertaking a rapid public campaign to be recognized as a Maria, source of emulation in Shia Islam. Though controversial, this effort underscored his understanding of the symbolic foundations of power in a theocratic state. He began delivering a series of eloquent lectures on Islamic philosophy, jurisprudence, and contemporary politics, gradually expanding his spiritual stature. Yet Khamenei's consolidation of power was as much about realpolitik as religious legitimacy. He repurposed key institutions, the Guardian Council, the judiciary, and state broadcasting into extensions of the supreme leader's authority. Loyalists were promoted to senior military and intelligence positions, while critical rival networks were either co-opted or quietly marginalized. The security apparatus was restructured, with the IRGC rising as the primary guardian not only of the revolution, but of Khamenei's newly minted rule. These changes were enacted against a backdrop of deep uncertainty. The Iran-Iraq War had ended in stalemate, leaving the nation exhausted and divided. Economic hardship and war fatigue threatened to erode the regime's legitimacy. In this crucible, Khamenei's silent strategies unfolded. He eschewed the grandiloquence that characterized Khomeini's leadership, preferring instead to work through trusted intermediaries, build consensus among the fractured elite, and move imperceptibly to outmaneuver rivals. Crucially, Khamenei recognized that the future of the Islamic Republic depended on balancing the multiple power centers that had emerged during the revolution: the clerical establishment, military elites, merchant classes, and revolutionary technocrats. He adopted a method that would become his signature, empowering each faction, just enough to achieve his objectives, but not enough to threaten his primacy. This involved delicate power-sharing arrangements. Former adversaries became cautious allies, and dissenters found themselves isolated by webs of patronage or targeted by the security state. The 1990s proved a defining period. While Iran struggled to rebuild its economy, Khamenei launched initiatives to renew cultural confidence and revolutionary zeal. State institutions promoted Islamic values through education, media, and public ritual, ensuring that the revolution remained a living, adaptable force. During times of unrest, such as the 1999 student protests, Khamenei's leadership was tested. Rather than crushing dissent outright, he allowed a degree of controlled opposition while using the unrest as justification to tighten security and fortify his control over civil society. Internationally, Khamenei charted a careful course between pragmatism and ideological commitment. He allowed presidents such as Rafsanjani and Khatami some latitude in opening to the West in pursuing reform, but always within clear, inviolable red lines. Sensitive portfolios, national security, intelligence, military affairs remained under his undisputed authority. His preference for indirect rule became increasingly evident. Presidents came and went, but the supreme leader's invisible hand was the constant in Iranian governance. By the dawn of the new millennium, Khamenei had completed his metamorphosis from revolutionary activist to supreme statesman. He had navigated the perilous transition from Khamenei's theocratic absolutism to a subtler, more adaptive mode of rule. The institutions he built, the networks he shaped, and the strategies he refined would come to define contemporary Iran, a system governed from the shadows by the silent strategist. Chapter 4: Blueprint of Authority Structure and Networks. At first glance, the architecture of power in Iran appears straightforward. The supreme leader stands at the apex, presiding over a vast clerical and political hierarchy. Yet beneath the surface, the true source of Ali Khamenei's durability lies in the intricate web of institutions, networks, and parallel structures he has cultivated over decades. This blueprint of authority constitutes both the shield and the sword of the Islamic Republic. The supreme leader's formal powers, as delineated in the Constitution, are extensive. Oversight of the armed forces, the right to appoint senior judiciary officials, control of state media, and ultimate authority over foreign and security policy. Yet Khamenei, ever the cautious strategist, understood that constitutional authority must be buttressed by the constant, invisible management of competing interests. From the outset of his reign, Khamenei embarked on a methodical project, consolidating the parallel institutions that were born of revolutionary necessity into permanent fixtures of governance. The most prominent is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, an entity that functions both as a military force and as a sprawling economic and political conglomerate. Under Khamenei, the IRGC was lavishly funded, given latitude to expand into commerce, and interlaced with networks of loyalists. Recruitment, promotions, even access to capital became tied to expressions of personal allegiance to the supreme leader. This strategy was duplicated across other spheres. The judiciary, ostensibly independent, became tightly bound to Khamenei through appointments and discretionary powers. Media outlets and public broadcasters, often presented as mouthpieces of the state, were in fact tasked with propagating the supreme leader's ethos, promoting narratives that blurred the lines between spiritual duty and political loyalty. In addition, Khamenei established religious foundations, banyads, and welfare organizations, ostensibly charitable entities that, in reality, commanded vast resources and exerted influence over construction, import-export, and local businesses. These shadow institutions operated with minimal transparency, providing considerable patronage to key supporters and helping to buffer the regime against economic shocks or popular unrest. Crucially, Khamenei did not seek to eliminate rival power centers. Rather, he cultivated a balance of dependency and rivalry. The clerical establishment retained its ancient privileges, but leading ayatollahs often depended on Khamenei's networks for funding and protection. Elected bodies such as parliament and the presidency were tolerated, occasionally encouraged as pressure valves, but never allowed to encroach on the supreme leader's red lines. Personal networks also played an indispensable role. Khamenei's eldest son, Mojtaba, rose to prominence within elite security circles, acting as a trusted intermediary proof of the dynastic dimension that quietly complements the meritocratic discourse of the revolution. Trusted lieutenants, many of whom shared the supreme leader's roots in the seminaries and revolutionary underground, occupied critical posts in intelligence, economic management, and ideological surveillance. The outward complexity of Iran's power structure, with its competing ministries, councils, and enforcement agencies, is thus less a sign of chaos than of purposeful design. Khamenei's genius has been to institutionalize ambiguity. Each actor depends on him for advancement, yet fears the consequences of unchecked ambition. Dissent is tolerated publicly only when it serves to legitimize the system's pluralism. Unchecked criticism, when detected, is met with swift, usually silent retribution. To outsiders, these arrangements seem archaic or overly convoluted. But for Khamenei, ambiguity is a shield. It allows for adaptation in the face of crisis, prevents any single faction from monopolizing power, and ensures that the supreme leader remains the ultimate arbiter. The ongoing existence of parallel security, economic, and religious bodies is not an aberration, but the very skeleton of Iranian stability under his rule. This sophisticated, networked architecture explains why Khamenei's authority has withstood multiple shocks, wars, sanctions, protests, without collapsing into authoritarian fragility or anarchic breakdown. Power in Iran is not simply dictated from on high. It is perpetually negotiated, managed, and fortified through structures that are both visible and hidden, formal and personal. This blueprint, painstakingly crafted over decades, is the enduring legacy of Ali Khamenei, a silent strategist at the heart of Iran's labyrinthine governance. Chapter 5. Silent Strategies. Diplomacy in the Shadows. If the grandeur of Western diplomacy is often punctuated by summits and press conferences, Khamenei's approach to foreign affairs has always preferred the whispered conversation to the open declaration, the maneuverings behind closed doors to the spectacle of the red carpet. His style of diplomacy is rooted in a profound skepticism of external powers and a determination to defend Iranian autonomy, yet marked by flexibility, patience, and strategic ambiguity. Upon assuming the role of supreme leader, Khamenei inherited a nation fatigued by war and alienated from both its neighbors and the wider world. His earliest diplomatic imperative was to secure Iran's borders and project stability domestically, while exploring limited avenues of international engagement. This required a delicate balancing act, rejecting Western hegemony yet avoiding crippling isolation, supporting regional allies without provoking outright confrontation. Under Khamenei's direction, Iran adopted a look to the East philosophy, cultivating ties with Russia, China, and selected non-Western nations. In this effort, quiet diplomacy flourished. Back-channel negotiations, secret envoys, and parallel tracks of statecraft became the modus operandi. The supreme leader maintained plausible deniability over sensitive talks, often allowing subordinate officials to absorb the fallout of diplomatic failures while preserving his own authority and flexibility. Nowhere is Khamenei's shadow diplomacy more evident than in Iran's regional interventions. From Lebanon to Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, the Islamic Republic has constructed networks of influence through alliances with non-state actors and proxy forces. These relationships were not built overnight. Rather, they are the product of decades of covert support, intelligence sharing, and ideological alignment. Decisions are rarely announced, but their consequences reverberate from Beirut to Sana'a. Khamenei's long game has involved supporting proxies, who advance Iranian interests by non-conventional means, thereby multiplying Iran's reach while shielding Tehran from direct reprisals. The nuclear dossier provides an illustrative case study. While publicly denouncing the West's double standards and proclaiming a religious ban on nuclear weapons, Khamenei authorized extraordinary flexibility in negotiations when circumstances demanded, such as during the 2013 talks leading to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. At every turn, he positioned himself as a guardian of principle, a staunch defender of the revolution, yet never so rigid as to close the door on pragmatic engagement. Behind the scenes, Iranian negotiators were given latitude, but the supreme leader maintained a carefully calibrated posture, ready to intervene or shift tactics as the strategic landscape evolved. Khamenei's silent diplomacy is fundamentally about creating strategic depth. He watches and waits, ensuring that whenever a crisis erupts, Iran is not easily cornered. His caution, sometimes mistaken for timidity, is matched by a readiness to act forcefully through subterfuge, if not open confrontation, when opportunities arise. As global dynamics shift with new rounds of sanctions, regional rivalries, and unexpected openings, the hand of Khamenei can be discerned not in the headlines, but in the subtle redirection of alliances, the patient fortification of Iran's position, and the persistent refusal to let any single adversary dictate Iran's fate. Chapter 6. Guardianship and Control: The Mechanisms of Power. Ali Khamenei's tenure as supreme leader is defined by a sophisticated architecture of guardianship, a combination of constitutional authority, ideological oversight, and direct intervention. In key areas, the mechanisms Khamenei deploys to maintain and consolidate power are both visible and invisible, legal and extra-legal, enabling him to exert control without appearing autocratic in the manner of a conventional dictator. The most obvious pillar of Khamenei's power is his constitutional prerogative. As the supreme leader, he enjoys the final say over all branches of government: the military, judiciary, legislative, and executive. This authority is codified in the Iranian constitution, which grants him control over military and security appointments, the right to mediate between state institutions, and veto power over major policies. Yet Khamenei rarely exercises these rights through public decrees. Instead, his preferences are communicated through a complex blend of personal audiences, letters, and confidential advisories. A less visible but equally potent means of control is the widespread deployment of vetting bodies. The Guardian Council, half of whose members are appointed directly by Khamenei, acts as a gatekeeper for the political class, screening candidates for parliament and the presidency, interpreting law, and ensuring the continued dominance of loyalists. The Expediency Discernment Council, likewise, serves as an instrument for resolving institutional disputes in a direction favorable to the supreme leader. Khamenei's approach to social control is marked by a duality: the simultaneous tolerance of limited dissent and the relentless policing of red lines. The press, civil society groups, and opposition movements are permitted only so much space as does not threaten the regime's core interests. When necessary, the levers of repression are brought to bear, from the judiciary's prosecution of dissidents to the intelligence services' surveillance and harassment of activists. The message is clear: contestation is allowed within limits, but any movement that challenges the sovereignty of the revolution invites swift and often silent suppression. Religion, too, is carefully curated. Khamenei uses his influence over the country's vast religious infrastructure to control the messaging of sermons, curricula in seminaries, and the appointment of Friday prayer leaders. Religion is not simply a matter of faith, but a tool of ideological mobilization, reinforcing loyalty to both the supreme leader and the revolutionary ideals he espouses. Perhaps most crucially, Khamenei maintains a delicate balance among competing factions. Within Iran's ever-shifting political landscape, he positions himself as an impartial arbiter, never fully identifying with any single group. He encourages competition, believing that managed rivalry prevents the consolidation of power outside his authority. Yet he never hesitates to intervene directly should factionalism threaten stability. The cumulative effect of these mechanisms is a system where the supreme leader reigns supreme not through blunt force, but through the continual calibration of incentives and punishments, a subtle guardianship that renders his authority omnipresent even as his public pronouncements grow ever more infrequent. Chapter 7. Challenges from Within. Dissent, reform, and resistance. From the inception of the Islamic Republic, internal dissent has been both a persistent undercurrent and a recurring wave threatening to break over the bastions of clerical authority. While Khamenei's tenure as supreme leader is often cast in the light of measured calm, it has been punctuated by episodes of intense internal challenge, emanating from within the regime's own labyrinth and the restless populace beyond. When Ali Khamenei ascended to the role of supreme leader in 1989, Iran was a nation emerging from the wounds of the Iran-Iraq War, battered but unbowed. Yet the revolutionary fervor that had propelled the Islamic Republic was evolving into a spectrum of ideological camps, hardliners devoted to theocratic purity, reformists yearning for civil liberties, pragmatists eyeing economic revitalization. Khamenei's initial years were marked by skillful juggling of these factions, ensuring that none acquired sufficient strength to pose an existential threat to his authority. But by the late 1990s, the winds of reform swept vigorously through Iran. With the election of Mohammad Khatami in 1997, millions of Iranians voiced their desire for greater openness, civil liberties, and engagement with the world. Khamenei's response was one of containment and co-optation. While he allowed limited reforms, he set red lines most notably around the supreme leader's prerogatives and the basic tenets of the Islamic system. When the reformists, emboldened by popular support, pressed further, Khamenei quietly empowered security services and judiciary organs loyal to his office. Newspapers were shuttered, activists imprisoned, and the spectrum of permissible political discourse gradually narrowed. This calibrated suppression defined the Khamenei era, his strategies cloaked in legality and justified by the need to safeguard the revolution. However, the deepening disconnect between the state and the citizenry only grew more evident, particularly among the younger generations. The Green Movement of 2009, triggered by the disputed re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, marked a watershed moment. Millions poured into the streets, chanting not just for reform, but for accountability, transparency, and the fundamental right to choose their leaders. Khamenei's reaction was swift and resolute. He publicly endorsed Ahmadinejad and signaled through the security apparatus that dissent would not be tolerated. The crackdown was brutal arrests, media blackouts, and street violence signaled that the system would bend, but not break. Khamenei's approach to dissent is layered. On one hand, he acknowledges, at least rhetorically, the role of criticism and dialogue in strengthening the system. On the other hand, he remains deeply suspicious of movements he perceives as tainted by foreign interference or as undermining the Islamic underpinnings of the state. State media and educational curricula have been mobilized to reinforce revolutionary narratives. Yet alternative voices flourish in the age of social media, digital communication, and diasporic activism. Parallel to these social and political currents is the largely unseen but powerful drama within the clerical and political elite. Inside the Guardian Council, the assembly of experts, and among the senior ranks of the Revolutionary Guards and the judiciary, struggles for position, patronage, and influence are rife. Khamenei's survival as supreme leader well into his 80s owes much to his acumen at managing these rivalries, occasionally pitting factions against each other, often redistributing power enough to keep any single group from dominating. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, everyday resistance simmers. Women challenging dress codes with quiet defiance, artists weaving subtle critiques into their work, academics pushing for intellectual autonomy, and minorities giving voice to their distinct identities. Each act, while seemingly minor, collectively forms a mosaic of dissent that the state constantly seeks to manage or redirect. Economic malaise, exacerbated by international sanctions and entrenched corruption, has become an increasingly potent driver of unrest. The nationwide protests of 2017 to 2018 and 2019, marked by broad and diverse participation, signaled frustration less over ideology and more over the basic demands for justice, opportunity, and dignity. In both instances, Khamenei's playbook remained consistent. Attribute unrest to foreign meddling, reaffirm the sanctity of the system, and deploy calibrated force to deter escalation. One must not, however, assume that the edifice is unshakable. The success of Khamenei's silent strategy depends on his ability to adapt, to offer limited concessions, and to recalibrate the tools of control without eroding the core of his own authority. Each new generation of Iranians introduces new challenges as exposure to global cultures and the speed of information outpace the state's capacity to contain it. As Khamenei ages and the question of succession looms, the challenges from within are likely to intensify. The seeds of reform, dissent, and resistance have not been eradicated, merely deferred. The future will test the durability of the mechanisms he has painstakingly constructed, and, perhaps most profoundly, the Iranian people's appetite for both continuity and change. Chapter 8. Legacy Unfolding. The future of Iran's silent strategist, the legacy of Ali Khamenei, is far from settled. It is, in truth, still unfolding. More than 3 decades at the summit of power have left a profound imprint on Iran's institutions, society, and identity. Yet, as Khamenei enters the twilight of his rule, a central question facing Iran is not only what has been built, but what endures, what evolves, and what may unravel after him. Khamenei's intricate system of governance, a blend of personal authority, clerical legitimacy, and security state apparatus, has thus far withstood both internal dissent and external pressures. Under his stewardship, the Supreme Leader's office expanded into a formidable nucleus, equipped with advisory councils, parallel bureaucracies, and networks extending through the judiciary, military, and economy. His legacy is visible in the perseverance of the Islamic Republic's institutional architecture, the normalization of vetting and limiting electoral choices, and the integration of the Revolutionary Guards into virtually every facet of Iranian life, from politics to industry and beyond. But Khamenei's greatest legacy may lie in the contradictions he has both embodied and managed. Ever the silent strategist, he has positioned himself as both a steadfast guardian of the revolution's ethos and a shrewd pragmatist, steering Iran through storms, whether it be war, sanctions, or shifting public sentiment. His leadership demonstrates a paradox, a system evolving to survive by being both inflexible in core principles but adaptive in tactics. Even now, this balance is being tested at its most fragile points. The question of succession looms large. Khamenei has, to date, not designated a clear heir, instead overseeing modifications to the succession procedure and the roles of the Guardian Council and Assembly of Experts. This ambiguity is strategic. It ensures no contender becomes too powerful and preserves Khamenei's hold on authority until the very end. Yet, it also breeds uncertainty. The jockeying for influence behind the scenes is intensifying, with clergy, commanders, and politicians maneuvering for position. The possibility exists for both a smooth transition and a tumultuous struggle for supremacy, with each scenario holding implications for Iran's future stability. Internationally, Khamenei's Iran has shifted from revolutionary export to regional power broker. His legacy is etched into Iran's presence in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, and in its persistent defiance of Western demands. Yet this regional strategy carries heavy costs, economic, diplomatic, and human, which his successors will have to reckon with. The axis of resistance he helped construct shapes the Middle East, but it also threatens to tie Iran to enduring cycles of confrontation. Domestically, the Iranian polity and society are undergoing transformation. Despite crackdowns and persistent narrative control, younger generations are increasingly asserting their desire for greater freedoms, justice, and opportunity. The internet, social media, and heightened global connectivity have seeded alternative discourses that no amount of repression can fully erase. There is, among many Iranians, a growing distance between state ideology and lived reality. Khamenei's silent strategy managed dissent, but did not deter its roots or resolve its causes. Economically, structural weaknesses remain unaddressed. Sanctions, mismanagement, and corruption weigh down prospects for prosperity. The next phase of leadership will be forced to confront these challenges more directly. And without Khamenei's unique gravitas or network of loyalties, the system may find it much harder to navigate. Yet, even as debates rage about Iran's possible trajectories, authoritarian perseverance, gradual reform, unpredictable rupture, Khamenei's imprint is indelible. He institutionalized the primacy of the supreme leader, ensuring the clerical oversight and the centrality of ideological discourse. He left an Iran that is more assertive abroad, resilient in times of crisis, but also more fractured at home, and more deeply entwined in global dynamics. Ultimately, Khamenei's legacy may not be fully judged by the durability of his institutions or the arguments of his adversaries, but by the choices of the next generation. Will they loosen the bonds he fastened so tightly? Will they redefine Iran's place in the world, or reinforce its exceptional path? The answers lie in the interplay between continuity and change, between memory and aspiration. In the end, the Silent Strategist tenure is a testimony to the enduring power of patience, adaptation, and the calculated use of authority. Whether history remembers Ali Khamenei as the quiet architect of stability or as the author of new challenges will depend on the future course Iran charts, guided in no small part by the shadows he cast and the silences he so masterfully maintained. Conclusion. Ali Khamenei stands as one of the most consequential leaders in the modern Middle East. His strategy silent, his maneuvers subtle, yet his impact seismic. His tenure encapsulates the collision between revolutionary ideals and pragmatic statecraft, between the demands of a restless nation and the imperatives of survival. Ultimately, to understand Khamenei is to understand the paradoxes and possibilities of Iran itself, a nation always at the crossroads of history, with a future still being written in the ink of challenge and change. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy.